Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let's just hope that we see sunrise in the morning. Tonight's show is a creepy, cryptid creature compilation. I think you guys are going to absolutely enjoy these very, very scary and interesting encounters and experiences. Please, of course, do let me know what you think down below. And of course, if you've experienced something similar, feel free to contact me on my email, which is dmtsforestofear@gmail.com. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell and stay up to date with all DMT content. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's first nightmare, entitled The Hunt Denmark Lemvig. Let's get straight into that. Hey, no sleep. So a while ago, I was going through my friends last night, asking through stories and whatnot. I randomly decided to ask my dad if he had experienced anything. I figured a man in his late 70s should know something about strange or scary encounters. It was safe to say that our Skype call was longer than I had originally anticipated. Although nice, as we basically sat down and traded stories till around 2 a.m, it was nice to talk to him. It made me feel like my life had purpose again. Anyways, it took me a good while to fish out a particular story I remembered when I was young, but he finally managed to spill it, and I will be telling it through his eyes, the way he explained it. Before I continue, however, let me explain to you what kind of man my father is. Born into the farmer's life, my father had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, the classical Danish family, with its own farm and all the lovely creatures that came along with it. However, my father wasn't like the rest of his family, tall, handsome, sharp face and tailored suit. My father looked like he'd come straight out of the Godfather movie. At the age of 17, my father ran away from home and settled in Copenhagen, although only for a year or two before he set out to work in places like Norway, Germany and Spain. When he reached his early 30s, he'd buy a van and travelled, starting from Denmark, down to Spain, and all the way east through the Slavic and into the Middle East, then up towards Russia and back into Europe. It's safe to say my father was an explorer, especially with the more than healthy amount of stories from his journeys. Anyways, here's the story. Summer was ending, and I could tell that S was getting fidgety. During the summer, he had spent his time simply exploring around the house and the nearby valleys and forests, playing soldier or knight or whatever it is that he does. And it was obvious he wasn't looking forward to going back to school. I worry for him sometimes. It started during the last week of his summer vacation. I found one of the chickens outside of the coop early in the morning. The poor thing was mangled and half eaten. Strange, as foxes and minks normally carry them off and eat them in a private spot so as not to be disturbed. After checking the fence, I found a hole which I patched up. Hopefully the bugger won't take any more chicks. The following night, I heard the sheep stressing in their pens. I went to investigate. It was lucky I got there in time. One of the sheep was bleeding badly from the right thigh, and I spent the following half an hour chasing something through the pens with a piece of wood. It was a sleepless evening for most part after patching together the sheep. The next day, the same sheep fell ill. She started throwing up and wasn't very active. She died a few weeks after school opened, on Wednesday of the last week of summer. S came running back from one of his ventures. He was crying and scared. He even abandoned his air rifle in the valley. I had to go get it before anyone found it. It was my first manly gift to him. I went alone, crossing the fields and manoeuvring through brush towards the valley. I had brought my double barrel, just in case I could tag whatever had chased him or attacked my sheep. It was rather easy to track the routes S had taken, and after about an hour I found the rifle in the mud. Luckily, it wasn't dirty and I could teach him how to clean a firearm. Before I headed back, I heard movement in the brush across the small stream that ran through the valley, and I saw what looked like a fox moving through the twigs. I knew instantly there was something wrong with the thing. It had no hair and looked scabby. The skin was dry and had an unnatural grey tint. Upon closer inspection, I realised it was much bigger than a regular fox, bigger than most dogs that are around these parts. My first instinct was to put it down. Maybe it had rabies. I could fetch a small reward from the local police for putting down a sick animal. So, I trained my rifle on the thing. But before I managed to pull the trigger, it stopped and looked right at me. Its eyes were strange, glossed over with a sickly yellow-white colour. But what really unnerved me was its mouth. There was no skin covering the teeth. I could see the sharp fangs run all the way back to the back of the jaw where the molars were, giving it a freaky grin. It stared right at me, and with a sudden growl it darted down into the brush. I was unable to shoot it and decided to head home with S's rifle. That night wasn't one of the easiest. S was scared. He kept looking out the windows, looking for whatever had chased him. I kept the shotgun loaded, hidden away on one of the shelves, out of reach from him, just in case the thing returned. And it did. At first, there was a sound of unrest from the sheep, but it ceased, and minutes later S came running, pointing towards the front of the house, saying, "It's out there! It's out there! It wants to eat us!" It took only a moment for me to calm him down. I locked him away in the bedroom with his comics, games, his TV shows and a good amount of candy to keep him occupied while I searched for it through the windows. When I got to the hallway where the front door was, I froze, seeing the thing sitting right outside the front door. Its mouth was covered in chicken's blood, and by its feet rested a bleeding, although still alive, chicken, wounded to the point it couldn't move, but still attempted to do so. As I watched it, it slowly lowered its head and dug its teeth into the chicken's chest, only to bite down slowly. The sound of crunching bone, and the chicken gurgled out in mercy as the thing killed it there, not breaking eye contact for 1 second. Then, as slowly as it had murdered the chicken, it simply left the body and backed away into the darkness. I've had enough of this thing. It needed to die. I called up my neighbour, and he said he had seen the same thing at his farm a week ago. It had killed half of his chickens. We both agreed to hunt down the thing and called 3 more of our buddies. We all met in front of my house, and the tracking began. After a good 2 hours, we managed to isolate it in a small wheat field. We agreed to let out our dogs loose and then follow them slowly. Then take it out as it bolted for freedom. My dog was a dachshund, Tony, an old relic from his hunting days of chasing foxes out of foxholes. He had a fight in him though, and was by far the most experienced of the dogs. Our 4-legged hunters did their job, despite the fact we could hear them fighting in the darkness. Jay heard it coming at him, but before he could fire, we saw him suddenly fall backwards into the wheat, as if his leg was violently jerked forward, and he screamed as he struggled with the thing. I ran for him first, and before I could get there, I saw him get up, limping in place, as he shouted at me, "It's coming for you! Shoot it! Shoot it!" I readied my double barrel and watched as the wheat shifted violently as the thing zipped back and forth through the wheat, closing in on me. I anticipated its move, and with a quick aim and pull of the gun, it fired with a loud crack, ending the creature. I sighed a breath of relief, and soon we all surrounded the thing. We looked in disbelief at this creature. It was no fox. It wasn't even a canine. It looked straight. It had a thumb too. It even looked like it could walk on its hind legs. We agreed that we'd not tell anyone about it, not even the police. so we dug a hole, burnt it, then buried it in the valley. Tony was wounded. His front leg was mangled. His right eye would never ever be used again. His right ear was basically only half of what it used to be. He lived long enough though, and died a happy death of old age. To this day, I still don't know what it was that we shot that night. I haven't brought it up, and neither have any of the others that hunted it. We're moving to Thailand in a couple of days. I found a dead chicken in front of the house again. I don't care. It's not my problem. I'm taking my son out of this place. H. So that's the story. When I asked my father about it, he had a haunting look. But he felt I should know what had happened. I was grateful for this. He even made me promise not to look for anything like it, or go dig up the one they had killed. Thanks for reading. S. Paranormal Residence. Let's get straight into that. So this all started 3 years ago. At the time, I was living with the older sister in a 3-bedroom apartment. It was just myself and her 2 daughters. She was going through a little financial crisis and neglected to tell me this herself. I didn't know that she was behind on 2 months' rent. We ended up getting kicked out, and I, only finding out a week prior to being kicked out, I was pretty effed off. My parents offered to let us stay with them. I, wanting absolutely nothing to do with my sister at the time, looked for another way out. I was dating my then girlfriend / wife, only for a few months. But there was no way I was going home to my parents. That same night, I stayed with my girlfriend, who we'll call Rose. Now, from the first night I felt uneasy, and just thought it was because of the new surroundings. I had nothing of my stuff with me, other than a duffel bag with clothes and my shoes. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house with her younger sister, who had a 5-year-old son. Rose made me feel so welcome, I almost shook that eerie feeling. She had a very little furniture, so I brought some over. She had no television, so I brought my 42-inch flat screen from home, and she loved it. I was settled in and comfortable till this one night. I kept tossing and turning. I couldn't sleep at all. I just felt like I was being watched. So I tell Rose, and she told me that I was probably just uncomfortable, and she noticed all the movement. Days later though, her sister, we'll call Martha, was cooking when I got home. So she says, "Hey, you think there's a ghost is watching you when you sleep?" I tried to laugh it off, but I was curious, so I asked her, "What ghost?" She looks at me and says, "Oh, Rose didn't tell you about the ghost." I almost wanted to laugh because I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. This place didn't seem haunted, just felt weird. So I called bullshit, and her sister gets this serious look on her face. Not mad, but like she was warning me. So I asked her how did she know this place was haunted, and she tells me this story. About a year before Rose moved in, she lived there with her uncle. He worked a job in construction and rarely left his room. In said room was a small dresser, an old television, and a big reclining chair. They had a small party in the front and backyard of the house. Her uncle is going to bed as soon as the house is empty and falls asleep. Now Martha, who woke up to go to the bathroom, had to pass by her uncle's room, who would leave his door open. She peeks in as she passes it and saw her son right in her uncle's face, watching him sleep. She calls out his name and he doesn't respond. She calls him once more and her uncle heard, so he began to wake up. Startled, he let out a small scream and her son runs to the reclining chair and covers himself with a blanket. She turns on the light to the room and the figure beneath the blanket is gone. So she runs to the room and her son is there in bed sleeping. He told her it wasn't a kid, it was a shadow, and that it wasn't the first time he's seen it. So, back to my creepy experience. I was amazed, shocked, and even excited to be living there at this time. I didn't care that my girlfriend failed to mention it to me. So I asked Rose and Martha's permission to contact the spirit. Stupid idea. They both agreed to let me contact the spirit without a Ouija board, and so long that neither of them were home. Next day, I had a day off. I bought a digital recorder and a Bluetooth speaker. I played static sounds through the speaker and it was recording in a room where the uncle saw the shadow. I asked who was here and to make his presence known. I heard a child's voice come through the speaker so clear it scared the shit out of me. "Hi," was all I got for almost 20 minutes, so I took a break. I turned on the speaker again and right away I hear the same exact voice from before. "Help, it hurts." I asked, "How did you die?" "I don't know," the same voice said. I couldn't believe it. Clear child voices were asking me for help. Startled, I put away all of the equipment without thinking about it for hours that went by, trying to communicate. I wanted no part of this, so I never tried again. Unfortunately for me, not breaking the connection, not voicing the fact that I did not want them to contact me anymore, was a huge mistake. Scary stuff happened around the house that was unexplainable. Small stuff went missing around the house. We'd hear footsteps that weren't ours. The light switch would turn on and off without anyone touching them. Once, I even left home for work and felt the door slam closed. I was ignoring it. Nothing really happened to my wife or sister-in-law. I was beginning to think they might have been pranking me. Till one night, I was in my room watching TV and my sister-in-law screamed loud. She was getting ready for a date, so she was half naked when I burst through the room, so I covered my eyes. I asked what happened, and she said there was a guy at the window wearing a mask. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and went outside screaming, "Come out, you sick fuck, so I can tear you a new one." No one responded. Instead, I was met with this ominous silence. I knew there was no one there. I asked Martha what he looked like, and she said he had a hairy face, and his eyes looked yellow. In her words, his face did not look human. That's why I said he had a mask on. Now I don't think it was a mask. Months go by and we have these regular occurrences. Things tend to go missing in the house. Rose and I make love quite often. Scary thing is, we had to stop. Every morning, we'd find one of our lawn chairs sitting right by the window, facing inside the room as if someone was sitting there, and we never saw anyone. Once I had Rose go to sleep early so I could lay down and watch the window. No one ever came by, and when I did wake up the next morning, the chair is right there by the window as always. Last creepy incident we had in the house before we moved out was chilling. I had Rose's nephew in a room with me watching Disney movies. We were having a good time and all was well till I went to the bathroom. I'm coming back when he was calling my name and he sounded scared. So I run into the room and he's by the window. I asked him what was wrong and he said, "The monster outside wants me to die." Now, he drew a picture of what looked like a werewolf with yellow eyes. When Rose got home, I had to drop him at her mum's house. I searched the house by myself and found nothing. That was the last experience, and I am glad all of us moved out of the house. We went our separate ways, and 3 years later, Rose and I are now happily married, and I get the chills whenever she tells me the stories. This past winter in BC. Let's get straight into that. Hello. I had a rather disturbing experience a while ago. I would like to share it with you and to give you my full consent to share this information that I'll be sharing with you now. I live on a reservation in central British Columbia, Canada. It was late at night and I was, and currently still am, having a sleeping problem. So, I decided to walk to my mother's house, which requires me to walk through a wooded area. I was walking by an office building, which is also cut off a park forest, and there's an area which has no streetlights. As I passed through it, I got a terrible feeling, like I was being watched. I ignored it, and at the corner of my eye I saw movements in the trees. I glanced over, but quickly dismissed it, for there is lights and a clearing a few hundred metres back there. As I walked through the road, about 250 metres, I was approaching a corner that has woods on one side, the left side, along with a trail and a back road. I kept to the right, avoiding the woods, and I was hearing what was obviously bipedal walking, because I could hear them walking and crunching through the hard snow and ice. I stopped and placed my hand on my knife, fearing people are going to attack me, for it's common here. After a moment, it stopped. I saw nothing in the trees. I carefully walked away, keeping a close eye on that area. I made the corner, and I haven't turned my back to the area when out to my left, in the trees, something quickly sprinted off into the woods. I turned as quickly as I could, but it was already gone. That's when I decided to go back, for I thought it could be a cougar or something. I quickly made my way down, and again, as I passed the office building, this time on my right, I looked over there, for that was the same direction of the woods, and I saw somebody standing by the picnic table at the top of some stairs that connect to that same trail. I heard the footsteps. I tried to get a good look at whoever or whatever it was by stopping and staring, but when I did that, they ran off, which then gave me a sense of dread. I was sure there were some guys planning to mug me, so I ran to the bottom of the hill, and this is where the worst part happened. I heard somebody yell, "Hey!" And how it sounded froze me in my tracks, because it sounded horrifying, like distorted and stained, and it just didn't sound normal. I looked over at the woods and scanned the tree line, and when I saw what looked like a deer, except it was standing on its hind legs. Now I've seen a deer, but they don't do that, but not for more than a few seconds at least, not like this. It was standing as still as stone, like it was normal, and it was looking right at me. Now, I'm a Native American, so part of me knew immediately what it was, but part of me denied it. I knew it was a Skinwalker. I trembled at the thought of one. I couldn't bear the thought of being face to face with one. I was frozen in fear, and now I'm a rather large man. I stand 6 foot and roughly 240 pounds, but I was ready to cry. It wasn't until it started moving, more or less hobbling towards me, and started screaming at it like I was trying to scare off an animal, but it wouldn't budge. And it wasn't until I pulled out my knife that it stopped. It was like it knew what it was. We stared at each other for a moment before somebody in the house behind me opened the door to see what I was yelling at. Immediately I ran, and immediately it ran into the woods, letting out an absolute horrible scream. Just as quickly, the man yelled at me to come inside. As soon as I did, he asked me how long I was out there with that thing. I couldn't even tell how long it was. He let me stay the night, and the next day he told me to go see an elder to get blessed. I asked him what it was, even though I already knew, and he told me it was something I should never talk about aloud. And he also told me not to go out at night anymore or alone, because he said once it takes an interest in you, it won't let me go so easily every night. Since I have trouble sleeping, I just need to get this off my chest. Thanks for reading this. The Antler Man of Jacob Lake. Let's get straight into that. My parents love going to the lake. They love the calm and quiet, the gentle rocking of their small inflatable boat, the taste of freshly grilled fish they caught earlier in the day. I think it's completely boring. Fishing is, like, probably the dullest thing I've ever had this displeasure to be a part of. from the time I could read until I was old enough to stay at home alone on long weekends. I would bring books and a portable video games on our trips to the lake. I loved my parents and legitimately enjoyed eating trout, but 2 or 3 days of quiet reflection doesn't recharge my batteries like it does theirs. To be fair, I have other reasons for hating the lake. For one, I have much fairer skin than my parents, so I burn easily. If left uncovered for a few hours, my forearms can easily be mistaken for high-quality lobster tails. For two, I almost died there when I was 3 years old. When you launch a boat from a trailer, you back your truck down a concrete ramp. The trailer sinks, the boat floats. You turn off your truck and put the parking brake on so it doesn't roll into the water. Then push the boat to the side of the lake where it can be moored up until you park. My father knows all this. He's a master at boats, or boating, or whatever. Somehow, the parking brake failed to engage that day. Also somehow, the transmission slipped out of park and into neutral. Dad was more in the boat at this time, so he was out of the way. Mum was safely on the other side of the lake, standing in one of the few remaining parking spots that could accommodate a trailer. I was in the truck, locked in my car seat, which was, in turn, seat belted in place. I don't remember much about the whole thing, but I do remember splashing backwards into the lake. The memory is static, a photograph burned into the mind. Maybe that's how memory works when you're a little kid. Who knows? I'm looking out the front of the truck. White squalls of angry water erupting on either side. Globs of clear water hanging in front of me, reflecting an upside-down image of the world. Beyond that, I see trees, sky, the roofs of the other cars, and the Antler Man. I can make out the deep, black, negative space of his bust and his antlers through the front window of the truck. I can see his whole shadowy outline in the orbs of the lake water suspended over my head. My next memory is of murk enveloping me as the truck and the trailer disturbed the lake bed. My dad swam down to the truck after me while my mum called the police. My dad says he found my car seat empty. When the sheriff's deputy, Yazzie, pulled the truck out the water with his winch, the seat was gone too. Some campers found me an hour later, sitting on a fallen pine tree in the forest and talking to myself. Yazzie thought my car seat had been dislodged because it was buoyant enough to float. I must have floated further into the lake where someone else found me, and I ran off to find my parents. But my dad insists the car seat was in the truck. Yazzie and my dad, who became good friends after that day, still have debates about it over a beer. Though that was the first time I saw the Antler Man, it wasn't the last. I knew enough to stay quiet about what I saw, lest someone in my family think I was crazy. If they thought I was crazy, they wouldn't leave me alone on the weekend, and then, my God, I'd have to go to the lake and enjoy the tranquility of nature. As I got older, I wondered how long I had been under the water. Was it long enough to cause brain damage? Was the inky void of the Antler Man a tear in my retina? A dead spot in my optic nerve? An aneurysm in my visual cortex? I assumed it was. It was safer than any other explanation. And I had to assume a shrink visit would be about as fun as the lake. I stayed quiet, researching medical causes here and there throughout high school and college. Over the holidays, my grandparents invited my whole family to this large ranch house up near, guess effing where? The lake. They usually do their own thing up there and drive down to see my dad and my uncle right around Thanksgiving and Christmas. In the whole time I've been alive, I think I've been there to their house once before. They're super nice and generous people, so it's not like they're hermits. I've wondered if they're hoarders or in a triad relationship with a Grey's Anatomy-ish doctor and were ashamed to let anyone find out. While everyone was busy cooking one afternoon, cooking is just another house in a neighbourhood of boring. Neighbour to fishing, I quietly backed away to check out the house. While I was looking for a secret McDreamy in the shower or a room filled with old issues of GQ, a painting hanging in the hallway put an end to the search. It was a landscape painted with deft enough hand that I could place some of the landmarks in the far background. An ancient adobe building hidden in the overhang of a wide eroded cave filled the foreground. It reminded me of a smaller Montezuma's castle, though the mud used in construction must have come from somewhere near Sedona. It was a bright pinkish red. What caught my eye, though, what completely ended the snoop session through my grandparents' house, was the shadow lurking in the corner of the painting. Ebony spires jutting wildly from its head. Antler man. I've always loved that view, Rachel, came the voice from behind me. I was too frozen to jump. Slowly, Grandpa walked around my side and appeared in the periphery of my vision. What's the matter, Rach? See something you didn't like? I turned to look at him. I tried to force a smile that didn't say, "You scared the shit out of me," or he continued competitively, "Maybe you saw something that didn't like you." My relationship with my grandfather had always been good, but for the first time, I felt uneasy next to him. He smiled, and I couldn't tell whether the mirth concealed within was genuine. "Come on, kiddo, dinner's almost ready." He clasped a hand on my shoulder as he walked away from me. "Oh, and Rachel," he added before passing out to the room, "I know you haven't visited our home very much. Please know that every door is open to you." He turned to walk away. "But remember that no one can close a door that doesn't want to be shut." I don't know where the line between thinking and dreaming was drawn. To be honest, I think it was shifting line in the sand, blown by gusts that didn't care what I thought was real. I do know that I lay in bed that night wondering what the door he might have meant. My half-dreaming mind had settled on the office in the back of the house, if for no reason than the fact that I'd never seen it opened. I would occasionally watch the digital clock. 2:01, 2:03, 2:10, 1:20. I slept for some time, but I couldn't resist. When I finally took off the covers, I found that I was damp from head to toe. The night was chilly enough so that I had never expected to sweat, but here it was. It didn't feel like sweat. It was almost... I got out of bed and started creeping through the house. I had to share a room with both my parents, so sneaking out as quietly as possible reminded me of being 16 again and trying to establish myself as cool. That had never really worked out, but not for a lack of trying. I was driven by the same feeling now. The brisk night air chilled me and left me feeling vulnerable as I snuck from room to room in only a t-shirt and shorts. I hadn't noticed how long the walk was to my grandfather's study, or how many open spaces there were in that empty house. I wondered if I should have brought my phone. My empty hands felt helpless. As I approached the door, new thoughts flew into my head, almost as though another person was sending them. Will the door be unlocked? What then? Will I have to sneak outside to crawl in through the window? You know that's crazy, right, Rachel? You realise that you're actually acting insane. I peeked around the corner of the doorframe. It was outlined in a faint blue light. I reached out to grab the doorknob, but found that it was already open a crack. I pushed it forward. It creaked. The room was a collection of the weirdest shit you can imagine, most completely obscured by darkness. The light was very weak. I had no idea of its source. One shelf was filled with an unholy collection of things that shouldn't have been floating in the formaldehyde. The chainsaw dangling from the ceiling was unnecessary. Why was there an IV bag on a metal stand? Surely forks should not be moving of their own accord. How much of this was real? The only thing I knew for certain did exist stood in the middle of the room. The rest may have been dreams or memories, but the solitary object sitting But the solitary object sitting on the otherwise empty desk was waiting to be held. It was a 10-point deer skull, picked clean and shining in the weak blue light. And I knew that it had been placed there just for me. The skull was waiting for me to try it on. I stared at the skull for a moment longer before stepping towards it with hesitant, jerking movements. It wasn't the first time I'd seen a deer skull, but it was the first time I'd been near one that seemed to emanate something, some kind of animalistic, vibrating power. The closer I got, the stronger the feeling became. My skin tingled as my fingers neared the bony idol, and my movements became more confident. This was what I was supposed to do. The skull was going to show me something, I was sure. But, other than a slight static shock, nothing extraordinary happened once I brought the skull down over my own face. Even the blue light seemed to dim a little. I took the skull off and looked at it in disappointment. I jumped about a foot in the air and almost dropped the skull as a creak came from upstairs. The sounds from the outside world, the normal world, cured me of the skull's trance. I shook my head, trying to free myself of the hazy feeling that had overcome me. Nothing weird was happening. It was just a skull, just the remnant of what used to be a whole and alive and pulsing. The upstairs floorboards groaned once again with footsteps. Flushed with embarrassment, I put the skull back down and quietly hurried back upstairs. Sleep came, though it wasn't restful. I dreamt about the day so many years ago, when the truck went into the lake with me inside. The fading light, the familiar murky darkness, the sudden and unnatural silence of water. And yet, my dream self was completely unperturbed. I even continued to play with my raggedy night blanket as the truck drifted towards the lake bed. The only sound now was the quiet dripping of the water and the creaking of the boat's trailer as it settled into its new home. Movement caught my attention outside the window. The Antler man was there, striding across the lake's bed swiftly, as if there was no water at all slowing his progress. Puffs of silt trailed behind him. He reached out and touched the window. Automatically, my dream self lifted their pudgy toddler's hand to do the same. The creaking of the car and the trailer seemed to growl louder. The glass shattered, and the Antler man took my hand in his. Blue light burst from his skull, illuminating the darkness around us with its unexpected radiance. The only time in the entire dream when I felt fear was then, when the grating sound of the car and the trailer rose to a monstrous concerto, when the light ousted the shadows and revealed the lake bed to be full of bones. I was awoken from my dream abruptly by the sound of footsteps and voices. Blinking away my sleep, I recognised the voices as my grandparents. Curiosity won out. Wrapping myself in my blanket, I ventured into the dark house once again. By the time I made it to my grandparents' room and pressed my ear against the door, the conversation had become intense. Not expected to be ready for another year or so, my grandfather protested. She's ready now. I felt it. He's made the pathway. My grandmother's voice sounded strangely sedate and lilting, like she was dreaming or drugged. That isn't possible. All things are possible. I heard a thump. Please, Owl, please. I'm not ready for you two to go. Not yet, Grandpa pleaded. There was a pause, and my grandmother said warmly, I would be lying if I said I wanted it to be happening this way, Bill. But you know, it has to be done. The fight gone from his voice, my grandfather said in resignation, I'll go wake her up then. My veins flooded with electricity and ice when my grandmother replied, No need, she's outside the door already. There was another pause. Goodbye, my love. There was a screech of the chair being pulled, followed by a snap. My grandfather let out a soft, choked cry. I couldn't hold back anymore and threw the door open. Grandma was hanging from a decoratively exposed truss beam, swaying listlessly. Grandpa was sitting on the bed, his face in his hands. He didn't look up. For just a few moments, blue light glowed from my grandmother's motionless palms. I started to scream, but before the air could even leave my lips, I felt old, calloused hands covering my mouth. I struggled to get free from his grasps, but failed to even budge his hands. The only move he made was to put his wrinkled pointed finger to his lips. In a hurried whisper he said, "Hush, Rach. Your parents can't know about this. It's time for you to see something. Something your grandma sacrificed herself for." I yelled through his fingers, trying to in vain cuss him out. Noticing my anger and confusion, he slowly pulled a little square container from his pockets and held it open. A blue powder filled the small box and stuck to the sides. "Come here and let me show you what I mean," he said, bringing me over to the grandma's hanging corpse. He lifted her lifeless hand and laid her chilling palm to my forehead. "Breathe in," he said, sticking the powder container under my nose. "Blue." I was in a bone landscape in the middle of a blue ocean. At the helm stood the Antler man, and, after finally seeing him up close, I was more than terrified than ever. He was a man, or he was at one time a man, but he was almost also an animal. His face was a distorted mess of human skin, covered by the flesh and bones of a deer skull, and his large frame was an unholy composition of bones, human skin, and deer pelt. He strode to the boat's railing in only a few steps. Slowly, he leaned over the railing and pointed into the murky blue depths. "Bones," he said before walking back to the helm and taking back up his stoic position. I walked to the edge and peered down into the water. The water was dark, but somehow I managed to view the bottom. Just as the Antler man said, there were piles of broken human and animal bones lining the bed, and making a mosaic of shades of white. The entire bony ground moved up and down in unison like a slumbering giant. I turned back to the man, but only found an empty boat. He was walking on the water away from the boat. Wherever he stepped, the water lifted itself up, and droplets of blue danced around the beast. He stopped for a second, turned, and beckoned for me to follow. I stepped out of the boat, but as soon as my foot touched the water, I was standing in the middle of a forest. The Antler man stood in front of me, staring and silently breathing. Each silent breath he took, the area around us changed. As slowly as a river eats away at its edges, the changes started to appear. First, the bones started to appear. They started off in a few fragments, but soon the ground was nearly covered by them. Then the fragments joined, creating smaller bones, such as toes and fingers. Finally, the bones grew in length till they were skulls and femurs and rib cages, along with the bones that formed out of the ground. Another change had started. The grass, trees and plants all started slowly but surely changing from green to blue. The entire forest was an Antler man paradise. Antler man lifted his head and gave me a screeching cry that nearly deafened me, and split my head open like an axe. I fell to my knees and covered my ears and eyes with both hands. I felt the ground beneath me take a change from soft dirt to something harder, more stone-like. The noise finally stopped, and I lifted my hands, revealing that I was back in my grandparents' house. All the evidence of my grandma's suicide was removed, and seeing how my grandpa was also missing, I assumed he had moved her to a more secure location. All I could find out of the place was a sheet of paper with the word El-Haz written on it. As I searched the house, I remember thinking the experience on the boat felt real, and that this, combing the home in a daze with my fear banging on my consciousness door, demanding futilely to be let in, felt more like the vision. Something about the word on that slip of paper further strengthened my resolve. even in the light of what I'd seen with Grandma, like it was a shield, but one great and terrible enough to destroy me if I were to wield it carelessly. When I had finally hit every room in the house, I relaxed. Fortunately, that meant my head was clear enough to let panic in. That skull I'd stupidly tried on was gone. My grandmother had killed herself for something. My grandpa didn't even try to stop her. And my parents? The whole thing happened under their noses. Where are they? Are they okay? I had to find them. I passed the window and headed for the front door, and took note of the brilliant colours creeping into the hallway. Sunrise. At least I knew where they would be. I headed to the lake against my better judgment. A dark, stray thought wriggled through a crack of my turmoil. I logged in the direction of the water. Remember when I thought this place was boring? I physically wiped the smirk from my face as I crested the small hill and saw Mum and Dad, perfectly alright, each balanced on one side of the inflatable raft, which itself sat on the placid lake, almost like a painting. Part of me thought that was sweet, a reminder of the good and the safe and comforting in this world. But another part, icily, reminded me I wasn't on the best terms with paintings just then. Okay, Rach, I told myself, this is a traumatic place for you. Just be chill when you broach the subject. Maybe there's a good explanation for all of this. That felt as stupid a thing to think then as it does now. I jammed my hands into the pockets of my jeans and felt that piece of paper again. L has. As I neared the water's edge, I drew my arms out and again I waved. Mum and Dad didn't see me, engrossed as they were in the exciting sport of sitting there waiting for an animal to do something. I opened my mouth to call them, but the sound died in my throat when I saw the dull, blue glow the bottom of the lake was casting up toward my parents' little boat. The sun continued its ascent, and as its rays touched the water, it was like the lake's own blue light fought and overpowered them. Even so, the sun managed one victory over the lake. I could suddenly see straight through to the bottom. I didn't want to, but I cast my eyes down into its depths. I imagined I felt the weight of that deer skull again. Bones, of course, and strange shifting shadows and ancient-looking symbols carved in the wood and dull ivory. They beckoned, swaying. Without thinking, because there's no fucking way I would have done this if I had, I dove in. Being under that water again scared the shit out of me. I mean, the cold and the eeriness of the whole thing actually puckered me up pretty well, but that's the saying. I swam down as fast as I could, the chill working its way into my muscles, freezing them up like an athlete gone to seed. The shimmering blue light was emanating from a single source, something buried under a thin layer of lakebed grime, and what seemed to be a ribcage with ancient, matted fur still attached. Though I was underwater and struggling for air, I couldn't stop myself from making a gag face as I brushed away the detritus. The empty sockets of the deer skull from my grandparents' house stared back at me. I hadn't noticed the markings before, but in the centre of the forehead, the chakra, third eye, semi-charmed life spot, was a poorly carved Y, the stem of which spouted above to make it three-pronged. The word El has filled my mind. I noticed the carving now because it shimmered with a blue energy like an empty road on a hot day. The light still filtered up through the lake towards my parents' boat. Their fishing bobbers danced lazily on the surface. I had to get it out of there. Like a lame bumper sticker, I grabbed the skull by the horns and, my lungs feeling like fire had been set in every microscopic evoluus, swam upwards. As soon as I touched the skull, the light faded. Had it even been there? I popped my head out of the lake like a turtle testing its safety, gulped in a few breaths, and swam away from the fishing parents. I climbed out of the lake, failing miserably at not getting part of the muddy bank on my jeans, and wondered what the hell I was doing. I knew I should chuck the skull into the forest and call the local sheriff's office to investigate whatever the fuck had happened with Grandpa. But the antlers felt heavy, powerful. I wouldn't need Sheriff's Deputy Sully in my family's name if I put on the skull and draped myself in its power. I lifted it like a coronation crown. "What the hell are you doing?" a voice called from behind me. I looked around. So much for calling the sheriff. Deputy Yazzie stood by his SUV. He couldn't have looked more like the confused Jackie Chan meme if he tried. "It's a hat," I said. I was going to make a hat." He still looked confused. "You know us millennials and hipster shit?" "Yeah, okay. That fits with bringing overalls back, I guess. But listen, I know we're not on reservation land, but this area is still considered sacred. Or whatever. You know old people and their hipster shit. I don't know if I believe it, but my parents would jump out of their walkers and beat me with their canes if they knew someone was disturbing bones in the lake and I didn't do something about it. Throw that in the back of my truck and I'll give you a ride back to your grandparents' house so you can get some dry clothes." The weight of the skull seemed to increase, like it was trying to root itself to the bank of the lake. The word El-Haz rose to my mind again, screaming like an earworm on maximum volume. I handed the skull over and got in, but I could feel it demanding that I stay outside the SUV. The dead eyes stared at me from the back seat as I buckled myself in next to Yazzie. He started the car and pulled out onto the isolated road. Once the lake had disappeared in the rearview mirror, he looked over. He offered. "Rachel?" I looked down at myself to find that I was quite a sight. My jeans were covered in mud, one shoe was missing, and my hair was still dripping wet. There was probably seaweed or something tangled in the back, smearing the upholstery. "Yeah," I started, before realising that he was staring at my hands. My fingers were covered in blood. "You okay?" he asked cautiously. The drying crimson on my hands shone purple for a split second before shining with the same blue light I had seen back at the house with Grandma. Deputy Yazzie didn't notice, though, because that's when he suddenly slammed on the brakes. I felt the skull slide off the back seat more than I felt my own body move. There was no thought in reaching out to grab it. My hands were wrapped around the alabaster treasure before I made any conscious decision. I know I have no idea why I placed it on my head. The only thing I can tell you is that in the moment, doing so seemed so like the most important thing in the world. I'm looking out the front of my dad's old truck, white squalls of angry water erupting on either side. Globs of clear water hang in front of me, reflecting an upside down image of the world. Beyond that, I see trees, sky, the roofs of the other cars. The water fills the car surprisingly quickly. I know that my car seat has me locked firmly in place, so there is no point in me struggling. I'm incredibly calm as the lake encompasses my neck, engulfs my mouth, infiltrates my nostrils, and overtakes the top of my head. My 3-year-old self feels no fear as my body loses its ability to breathe. The world shimmers in waves, and so do the antlers. It takes them several moments to become rigid, and then I can see the skull clearly. It is fetid and rotten, except for the eyes. The deer's skull holds 2 blue eyes, sharp as katanas. They look to tear right through my own in a savage, unrefined attack. It reaches out a hand that wraps around my tiny neck, and panic overwhelms me. Courage is only possible in places where fear lives. Fear keeps us alive. El-Haz. Its jaw falls open and a rotten black tongue worms towards my face. It stroked my skin, somehow dry in the water, impossibly cold and warm all at once, seeking every crevice of my head with its gooey, soft, bumpy surface. It is 3 inches deep inside my ear when I open my mouth to scream, and the water rushes in. I awoke to my own scream. I had no recollection of the decision to pull the skull off my head. I was simply aware that my hands were on the antlers as I lifted it higher. I held it out in front of me. It was glowing blue. So was I. The strange wire carved into the forehead shone with a painful glare. I realised then that I was standing in the middle of the road. How the fuck had I gotten here? I looked around for the SUV. It didn't take me long to find it. The front of it was wrapped around a tree. The engine was smoking and green coolant was pouring on the floor. But I barely noticed any of that. My attention was consumed by Deputy Yazzie. His blood-drenched corpse splayed across the hood of the car, covered in broken glass. His head was sitting upright in the middle of the road, a dark puddle growing slowly underneath, until it was coming out in rapid, wheezing huffs. I looked at my shaking hands. The blood had gone back to its regularly rusty crimson, but there was more of it on me now, a lot more. It was beginning to congeal on my skin like Elmer's glue, tugging at my flesh like it had something important to tell me. Was any of this real? What the fuck? When had my life become some kind of convoluted, violent waking nightmare? When did I decide to look like a goth character in an edgy 90s music video about a psychological baggage? Did I kill Yazzie? When that thought floated through the surface of my mind, I turned and vomited on the side of the road. Deputy Yazzie, whose kind and concerned face was one of the first ones I saw after the accident at the lake all those years ago. At least, that I could remember. Blue tinged the corners of my vision, and I swayed on my feet, stricken with fresh nausea. When it cleared, I realised the road I was on did not look familiar. Where did Yazzie take me? Or did someone else take us here? I noticed something soft and white move in the corner of my eye and snapped my head to look. My grandmother, translucent and bright, was floating at the edge of the road. She raised one hand and pointed to my right, down the hill. "Grandma!" I cried. "What's going on? Where's Grandpa? What is all this?" My whole body was trembling now, but my grandmother didn't say anything in response. I hugged myself to try and stop the shuddering. Somehow, seeing her mute made me feel more alone. So, like a total idiot, I went in the direction the ghost of my suicidal, glowing grandmother told me to. The bottom of the hill wasn't far away. There, the earth faded to the rocky sand of the beach. Waves lapped at the shore, their gentleness making me more aware of my own fear and confusion. Along the shore was a cave. As I neared, I saw there was a simple shape carved into the rock. A 3-pronged line, like a wire with an extra point. El Haz. For a moment, I thought I hallucinated the sound. Then I recognised my grandmother's voice. Her figure, once white, glowed blue. The wind picked up louder and louder until my grandmother's words were the only thing louder than its rushing whistle. El Haz. The ground in front of me bubbled, and I recoiled instinctively. White bone began to show underneath the dark, coarse sand. Points. The points turned into antlers. In a few seconds, a familiar sun-bleached skull rested in front of me. El Haz. When I looked up, my grandmother was gone, replaced by the sound of footsteps crunching through the sand. Something was coming out of the cave. Without knowing why, I grabbed the skull. It was too late for me to run or hide, but the skull comforted me for some reason. In my gut, I felt it would protect me. The figure, glowing slightly like dead grandma, approached the mouth of the cave. I was stricken with dizziness once I recognised who it was. Yazzie? I started as a whisper but ended as a shout. The deputy's face seemed more lined and heavy than usual, as he surveyed me with an expression of mixed sorrow and resignation. Like my grandmother, he raised an arm and pointed. He wanted me to go inside the cave. The skull vibrated in my hands. The only thing I saw was the cave walls, 3 sides, and a few stalactites hanging from the roof. The ground in the cave was the same as the outside, a nice combination of sand and broken shells. Suddenly, the ghost of Yazis brushed past me and started glowing again. Instead of the normal blue that shone from the Antler man and the deer skull, he glowed a bright shade of red. He touched the back of the cave, which began to burn with a bright light matching his own, before sliding open to reveal a deep passage. He formed a large, red tomahawk out of thin air and presented it to me. I had seen the same one once before when I was younger. Surprisingly, it had been at my other grandparents' house. They were both Navajo and both disliked my mother. Something about bad blood or how she stole their son, blah blah blah. We used to go see them every year, but my mother stopped that tradition when I was about 7 in order to stop their constant bickering and complaining about her. Even though I hadn't seen either grandparent in a while, I still remember what they told me about the tomahawk. I mean, first, it wasn't a tomahawk. There was a different Navajo word for it, but they let it slide when I started saying the tomahawk instead of an axe. Like Yazi said, old people and their hipster shit. Anyway, my Navajo grandparents said it was once a family heirloom that had originally been owned by Hatali, which is essentially a medicine man if you wanted to get racist about it. He was respected for his leadership in blessing way and enemy way ceremonies to keep the peace and protect his small community. He had a dream about a thunderbird one night after a protecting ceremony, an event that signifies a person's need to become a war chief, and constructed the tomahawk. His enemy, however, was not another band of Navajo, a different tribe, and encroaching Europeans. He held off a Skinwalker incursion and sacrificing himself for the safety of his community, or, whatever. I don't remember the whole deal. I reached out and grabbed my ancestor's weapon. As I did, I could feel the pull of the skull telling me not to pick it up. When I held out both in either hand, they both glowed brighter. The skull emitting a shimmering blue, the tomahawk a deep red. They began to heat up in my hands like an overtaxed 9-volt battery. I held both and walked into the cavernous room that had been recently unveiled. At once, I was hit by a disgustingly sweet and pungently sharp smell of rotting flesh. I looked around, trying to find the source. It didn't take long. I was in some kind of burial ground. On every side, small nooks had been carved and skeletons placed. All the corpses were adorned with shells and Navajo symbols. Above each was a Navajo word I couldn't read. Probably it was the names of the interred. Drawn on the ground in front of some of the graves was a rounded face with a lightning bolt on the right side. While I always thought it looked like a native David Bowie, it was actually a Navajo folk hero, Monster Slayer. In front of others was a symbol I knew well from childhood, Great Coyote. At the farthest section where stood an empty grave, instead of a corpse, a strange arrowhead glowed red from the back of the tomb. I stumbled over to the grave and reached in, but the arrowhead was just out of my grasp. I had no choice. I set down the tomahawk and skull, thankful to let my hands cool down, and climbed into the tomb. It was deeper and darker than it appeared, and the only light I could see was the red glow of the arrowhead in the very black. I finally reached the back pressed against the arrowhead. The carved rock wall moved slightly at my touch. Another hidden door, but partially stuck shut from disuse. I reeled back and slammed my shoulder into the door, sending it flying out of its frame. I was blinded by the sun as the tunnel apparently led to the outside. My eyes took a second to adjust, but when they did, I knew exactly where I was. I stood in front of the adobe cliff dwelling from the painting in my grandparents' house. I had no idea what the fuck was happening, so I decided I might as well explore. I wished I had my camera to take some pictures of the sick ruin so I could post to Insta later. Along with the wall that held the door, through which I had emerged was a detailed petroglyph. I'd never seen anything like it. Even though it was just animals fighting, it felt important, heavy. On one side was a large elk painted in electric blue. Its face was peeled back, revealing a cleaned white skull with razor-sharp blue eyes. On the other side, attacking the elk, was a pack of ferocious black coyotes with red stripes in their fur. In the very middle, however, was a large human figure. One half of it was blue, and the other half was red. I rubbed the wall, feeling the grooves and edges of the petroglyph cuts, and thinking about the tomahawk, the skull, and my own blonde hair. As soon as my hands fell on the elk, I heard a noise coming out of the bushes behind me. "There you are!" she said. The rock walls had vanished, the door had come through and gone. I was on the road near where Yazzy's SUV had crashed, but it was nowhere to be found. Were you talking to yourself? My mum asked, her bottom half an equally muddy mirror of mine. I was struggling beneath the weight of history, but for some reason, this extra intrusion didn't shock me. "Hi, Mum," I replied. I could feel the stupid fucking look on my face just as actually as I felt my exhaustion, but she politely, deliberately ignored it. "Was that you back at the lake? Where the hell did you wander off to?" She was cheery. I had to reason she hadn't known about Grandma and Grandpa, about the skull, about the deputy. One half of me screamed and grit its teeth under the weight and the other, and I said nothing. "Anyway, you look like shit," she teased, plodding over and nudging me playfully when I scowled. Mum knew I didn't like the lake, so whenever we came by, she tried to play the cool mum to put me on a more at ease, generally vibe. I didn't mind. But even though she also looked like shit, that one kind of hurt. I imagined the tormented yowl of a coyote somewhere deep inside my chest. The fish weren't biting, I learned, and Dad had gone on ahead to get back to his parents' house and get us started on a late lunch. I winced. Imagine him searching the house for Grandma just as I had, but nevertheless, we started a long trek back. By the time we reached the door, it was unlocked, and the sun was beginning to set. It'd have to be a very late lunch, I mumbled through mountain dread, extremely mountain hunger. When we stepped through the foyer and got a look at the house, I knew we wouldn't be eating lunch at all, maybe not for a while. Yazzy's head sat atop a serving tray, the congealed blood a stark contrast with the porcelain dish. In chairs around the dinner table, in a disgusting farce of a family meal, were Deputy Yazzy's and Grandma's bodies. Both their chests were caved in. Their rib cages, I assume, had been removed, and a plate of internal organs, some with bites taken out of them, were arranged at an empty chair. In my peripheral vision, I could see him stalking around the kitchen. Antler man. My mum was screaming in full hysterics, yelling for Dad or Grandpa. Antler man's shadow stepped closer to the table, and Grandma's body lurched forward, as if pulled by a fishing line attracted to her breastbone. Her head turned slowly, stiffly. Some force fought against rigor mortis. "Plenty of room at the table. Join us." The voice, hoarse and deep, came out of Grandma's throat, but it wasn't her voice. "Rachel," it said when I hadn't moved. "Sit." I walked forward, trying to stop, to fall, to scream, to grab the jam between the foyer and the kitchen. Nothing worked. I pulled out a chair against my will, my body moving like a cutscene in a video game. I felt like I was trapped inside a shrinking tube, claustrophobic in my own body. "I need you, Rachel. You need me." Antlerman and Grandma leaned forward to make eye contact, blood and intestines falling from their gaping torso. Her eyes were like honed obsidian scalpels with a dull electric blue glow. I stammered. I could still unable to move under my own accord. "Fuck me. Your mother's lineage has already done that. 1,000 years I've been trapped between life and death. Antlerman Grandma waved a hand like a poorly lubed robot. Stop fighting me, Rachel. If it weren't for me, you'd be dead. I saved you from the crash today. I pulled you from the drowning in the lake as a child. My seed produced half of your genetic makeup. See me for the family I am. My head turned to face Grandma directly. I fought against emotion, sharp pain blossoming in my neck. I found myself on the Norse long ship again. The stinking, dirty, bearded men worked into a fervour of sighting land. Maple trees dotted the landscape. Stereotypical Thanksgiving Indians peeked out from behind large trunks and Iroquois longhouses. The blood of the innocent men and women washes over my bare, muscular chest as I cleave with my axe. I use the edge of my round shield to bludgeon one of the Indians directly in the temple. The crunch of the contact excites me. Adrenaline pours into my veins. I want more. The next morning, we find our boats aflame. Leadership orders half our contingent to begin construction on a new fleet to return to the Greenland with our spoils. With word of a new, rich land to the west, perhaps we will once again be in the good graces of those with their feet too firmly on land. Good riddance, I say. Let them freeze in the ice of Ragnarok. My belly is full, and my body is sexually sated by what these tanned men don't adequately use. I argue we should remain, begin a new colony. It has come to war. Leadership was too soft. They wanted the old ways when new opportunities were presented themselves. I lead the berserkers in battle, spilling old friends' blood in bittersweet, but they fought and died well. We will see them again. We have sliced and maimed our way deep into this new land. The potion that brings us in contact with our war animals are dwindling. I fear the rituals will become impotent. While we still be capable of slaughter, but our bodies will tire of carnage without the fire and rage of our drink. These tanned men must have wizards and potion masters among them. We will find them and cut new recipes out of them if need be. My vision cleared, the kitchen coming back into view. We crossed the land, always hearing that the people from the dirt, the dying, had the power we sought. Antlerman Grandma raised an accusing finger, the final digit twisted and broken. Your mother's people cursed us to walk the deserts for eternity in decaying, rotting skins. Man, animal, whichever skin we can trick our way into. But once inside, nature takes its course. In a few days, the body degrades too far. This body wouldn't last a walk to the lake and back. I could feel a tear wash over the brim of my eyelash. I couldn't watch this thing abuse Grandma much longer before something inside of me broke. The Kermen of your whore mother reduced my number to a single warrior. They came after us in the dream world, the day world, skin bodies and star bodies. They cut us with the hatchets while we were defenceless. Those were not good deaths. I fear those men are lost to the sand of time. No feast awaits them. But Rachel, family blood is powerful. Family skin is different. Yours would allow me to escape from this prison. Your culture has eroded that of tanned men enough that no one will oppose us. Antlerman Grandma reached out a hand. Rachel, it said, we can use your body together. I will allow you to your space. I'll teach you what I know. Then you will bear a male child as my vessel, and I will take you as my queen. Antlerman Grandma pushed the plate of organs towards me. You must eat this flesh. Your grandmother was a loyal servant. She tainted her flesh with berserker poison. Eat from her sacrifice and draw on Elhaz. I could feel the force release my body. I slumped. No, I said. too exhausted to run or fight. "No! Kill me! I won't do it!" "I won't kill you," Antler Grandma said, rising from the chair of an unsteady crack in bones. I could feel him seize my body again as Mum and Dad walked into the room mechanically. "You will agree or I will make them tear each other apart in front of you." And with that, Mum grabbed Dad's face and pulled at the soft flesh beneath his eye socket. Blood began to swell. Grandma stumbled backwards with a loud explosion. My body slumped forward again, free. I turned to look behind me at the foyer. Grandpa stood in a doorway with bloodshot eyes and wet cheeks. He had a cowboy-style lever-action rifle in his hands. He pumped 3 more shots into Grandma as he yelled, "Get the fuck out of her!" I stood, wanting to help. The block on the kitchen held the sharpest knives, so that's where I went. "Rachel!" Grandpa yelled. "The skull! Trash it! The skull! Trash it!" He fired another 2 rounds into Grandma's convulsing body while pulling a revolver from Yazzy's holster. "It's in this poor bastard's car." I ran out of the house to find the crumpled SUV waiting out back. The skull, bright as ever, sat in the back seat. I opened the driver's side door, hoping Yazzie might have had a shotgun in the car like the cops on TV. He didn't. But something tugged at my awareness from under his seat. I pushed the seat back as far as I could and found an old, splintered tomahawk, the same one from the hallucination. Yazzie had given it to me. I ran back to the back seat and brought the tomahawk down as hard as I could onto the crown of the skull as a small war raged inside my grandparents' house. The bone splintered, glow fading. I hit again. Deep, inhuman howls of pain reached me from the house. I cleaved the skull, hacked at its eyes, pried the jaw. The shooting inside stopped. "Rachel!" said Grandpa's soft voice. "You did it! He's gone!" "Yeah!" He put the keys to his truck in my free hand. "We'll load you, your parents up and then drive. Get out of Arizona. Don't go to any of the 4 corner states. Go north where he couldn't have been and don't stop for anything." "What about?" I was stopped by a hand. "Just go. I'll take care of everything. Just go now." I drove away, and that was a few years ago. We were able to pretend things were normal sometimes. And then Dad started seeing shadows at the corner of his eye, hearing voices telling him to hurt people he worked with, to hurt Mum. He checked himself into a hospital. Then Mum got cervical cancer. She was dead in 2 months. Now I'm alone, and I'm seeing the shadows, hearing the Skinwalkers whisper for me to join them. All I have is the tomahawk, and I don't know if I should try to use it on them or on myself. Wow, hope you guys enjoyed that extra long edition of DMT and those collection of very sinister, creepy stories, in particular the last one there. Do of course let us know down below in the comments. As ever, please do like and share. And remember guys, if you're going hunting, hiking, or maybe just a camping over at your local park, take a flashlight, spare batteries, check the weather, take some food, but above all, make sure you be safe, not sorry.